Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Hi, welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Stan Miller. Our guest today is Tom Schwab. Tom is an entrepreneur, an author, and a podcast interview marketing pioneer. So, Tom, welcome aboard today.
Stan, thank you so much for having me.
Tom, it's great to get to know you. I'm really fascinated by what you do, and I want to get into that. But before we get into that, I want you to spend a little bit of time just telling us about you, about your background, because I know there's a pretty good story there.
Well, and there's always a good story when you got this much gray hair, right? So throughout life, I've learned that, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And it's been my life too. So I grew up in the Midwest, and by the grace of God and a clerical error, I got into the U.S. Naval Academy. So to anybody who's a taxpayer, thanks for paying for my education. I was an engineer, ran nuclear power plants, worked in corporate, as an entrepreneur. And like I said, the one thing that always struck me is that what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And today it's easier than ever to share that with people, right? And we do it on podcast interviews. That's how we help people do it. And it's an amazing medium that really allows you to not just break through the noise, but get heard by the people you want to.
How did you discover that to be true?
It's one of those things I can point to the time that I thought that it really struck me. So I was on an aircraft carrier, right? And when somebody hears that, the first thing they say is, do you watch the aircraft? Right? Do you watch the planes take off and land? And that was a joke, because you could always tell somebody that was new, because they would go up the, whatever it is, 10 flights of stairs to watch the planes. And after a couple of days, you're just like, man, that's a long haul, right? And so you would just go to, it became normal in about 2 days. And as I went on with life, I thought with so many things where you'd be talking to somebody and they're like, wow, how do you do that? And it's like, well, it's just normal to me. But we're all amazed by other people. It's like the person that can do the fourth grade math is amazing to the person that's trying to figure out second grade math. And what's great about it is that we can all help each other, right? That what I have learned throughout my life, through the errors, through the hard lessons, it wasn't just for me. It's to help someone else with it. And, I used to say, well, who can I share it with? Here, I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, right? We were socially distanced before it was normal. But now with technology, it's so easy to connect with people. I'm in Michigan, you're in Arkansas, but we can still have this conversation, and people can listen to it throughout time, right? No matter where they are.
Yeah, I know what you do is you're in the business of helping people develop their podcast and use it as a marketing, a practice development, business development tool, right? Podcasts haven't always been popular, but you've been at this a while. So I think when we were talking before we began recording here, I think you were really making the point to me that this is really about connecting in a conversation, right? I mean, it really reduces down to that, right?
It does. And early on, podcasts have been around 20 years right now. We've been around 9. And for the first few years, I'd give my elevator pitch and people would go, what's a podcast? Right? And it's really not about the podcast itself, right? That's just the medium. And I think it's so powerful, to grow your business being heard by your ideal customers. And, 20 years ago, that used to be guest blogging, right? To tap into somebody's audience. If you go back probably, 40 years ago, it was, speaking at the Kiwanis Club or the Rotary Club. And while it was effective, today it's even easier because you don't have to travel any place. You can do it over time. If somebody was sick that day that you were talking at the Kiwanis Club, they weren't going to hear you. Whereas here with podcast interviews, they can hear you when and where they want. So it's really just a new medium to connect with people.
So I don't want you to give away all your secrets today. And I'm not gonna, that wouldn't be fair. But I know that you wrote a book called One Conversation Away. And I think in that book, you do share some thoughts about how to do podcasting properly. So could we get just like an abbreviated book report about what
Yeah.
we would learn if we had that book, which, by the way, I think is available, right? It's available on your website, and we'll make sure we have that, at the end. I'll make sure we put the web address in the show notes. But what would we learn, in summary, if we read your book, One Conversation Away?
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioned it. If you stay to the end, you get a free book. It's really, there's no secrets, right? What we're doing is not magic. It's not a secret. It's just a system. And it's a system that we've learned over the last 9 years. And we share like why you would do podcast interviews, right? Should I be a guest or should I be a host? There is a difference on which strategy you take. It's also, what podcast should I be on? Right? How do you pick those podcasts? Not everyone is perfect for you. And then there's the question of, well, how do I get invited on a podcast? Once again, it's not a magic script that you send this email to 1 million people. No, it's connecting with that host, having the conversation. How do you prepare for the podcast interview? And then how do you have a great conversation? And by great, I mean something that gives value to the audience, something that gives value to the host, something that drives value to you. And then finally, how do you help people, right? How do you not just have a random discussion, but how do you help them for the next steps? How do you move them from being just a passive listener to an active visitor back to your site? And then ultimately, an engaged leader or customer. Right? It's not magic. It's not art. It's really just a system. And I openly share it because I've learned it. I didn't, discover it. It was just all the clients we've had over the years. I learned something from each one of them, and they taught me, and I'm teaching other people.
So tell me a little bit about your process. How do you go about doing this with your clients?
Yeah. So really do they have something that is a relationship sale, right? So if you're just selling a $5 widget, nobody needs to know who you are. It's not a relationship, right? And those you can sell through a funnel, and you can sell it through, Facebook or whatever it is. But if you're doing a relationship sale, it's going to take a conversation, right? And so we talk with people, and we first bring them on and say, why are you doing this, right? What's the goal? Right? Just being on a podcast interview is not the goal. It's what are you trying to accomplish? And then the next one is, who do you want to talk to? Right? Because that's important. Not everybody in the world wants to hear you, or you want to hear them. What kinds of things could you talk about? So we prepare our clients for that. And most of our clients are, high-level coaches, high-level consultants, professionals that know their content. They might even be media trained, but there's differences with podcasts. So we work with them on that. And then we help them with every interview to prepare for it. And, the best copywriters you will ever find are your customers, right? And I can remember early on, a client of ours said, I love working with Interview Valet because you let me be the guest and you take care of the rest. And I'm like, oh, that's good. I'm going to take that. Another one said, Sinatra only sang. I'm like, what's that mean? He's like, well, Sinatra's hardworking. He was a smart guy. He could have done it all, but he surrounded himself with people that freed him up so he could just sing. And that's really what we're doing.
Yeah, I've heard, I've heard somebody told me once that Sinatra did not move pianos.
He was a hard worker. I'm sure he could have, but he was
I'm
smart
sure he
enough
could have.
to realize that was not his job.
Yeah. So you work with clients to help them figure out what their message is, who their target audience is, and then coach them through the mechanics of how to actually do this in a way that makes it effective. That's what I'm hearing, right?
Correct.
And it sounds like is this an ongoing relationship you have with your clients? So they're doing the interview and you're doing the rest. Is that what I understand?
Yes, and for some clients, like if they're doing a book launch, maybe they'll only work with us for 3 months, right? Just to get those interviews out. We call it a
Hmm.
podcast book tour, right? All the
Hmm.
podcasts drop, they hit a list. Most of them are working with us, for ongoing. We've got clients that have been with us for years and years, right? And because they know they have to build the brand and that continual exposure. And we're finding the podcast. We've got the relationships with the hosts so that we can introduce them.
So without, I'm not asking you to share names or confidential information, but can you share with me in just a general sense, maybe one or two success stories where podcasts have proven to be a really powerful and effective way to accomplish your client's objective?
Yeah, and let me give you one. It was a professional, right? He's a CPA. He's a tax consultant, and he came to us, and he had the weirdest request. He said, "I want to find 50 new clients in 50 new states, and I don't want any of them to be in the same industry." And I'm like, "This sounds like throwing a dart at a dartboard." And Stan, the backstory is that he was almost wiped out because he was in Long Island and everybody was brick and mortar during the last recession in 2008. So he's like, I want to totally diversify. So we started to go out into different podcasts. And about 4 months in, we looked at the data and we're like, this podcast with the dentist, right? You were awesome on that. And he's like, yeah, I got a few clients from that one already. And he's like, I love dentists, right? They're recession proof. They're professionals. They've got good cash flow. And I'm like, well, they clearly love you too. So for the next 5 months, all we did was dental podcasts. And so much so that the CPA started a podcast of his own that was focused on dentists and the business side of it to help his current clients out. So in his market there, he was able to use it as market research, right? And the market told him what worked well. And he built his entire business out of that. And at the end of that 5 or 6 months of doing dental podcasts, he had all these recordings. So he had all of this content and he was able to take that to someone and say, hey, could you make more content for me? And I remember he actually, we talked about this and he found a intern, journalism intern at a local college, and he hired them for a semester and they made blogs out of it and they repurposed all the content. You can get a month's worth of content out of every interview. So not only did he get business from it, he got the market research, but he had all his blogs and all his social media done there.
Yes, that is true, right? So you do the interview and you can repurpose that in all kinds of different ways including you can build books out of it, for example. Yeah.
You can, and it's
Yeah.
unlike like a radio interview where if somebody didn't hear you, they never will, or maybe a Facebook ad or pay-per-click, or even an article in a newspaper or a magazine. Most people are just throwing those away. So it's not evergreen content. And with podcasts, we're recording this here in 2023. There's probably somebody listening to it for the first time in 2027, and it's still applicable to them. So it's sort of that evergreen content that's timely, but also timeless.
So you wrote another book called Podcast Guest Profits. Tell me how that fits into the model.
Right. So those two books, one of them is sort of the tactics, the other one's the strategy behind it. And so Podcast Guest Profits was the first book, and it was sort of the nuts and bolts of this is how you do it. And while it's important, I think it's the, it was, I don't know, the prequel to One Conversation Away, which was really about why this is so important. There's this marketing term now out there where people say you're one funnel away, right? Oh, all you need to do is do a funnel, do these paid ads, all the rest of that. And Stan, I just scratched my head and thinking, nothing good in my life has ever come through a funnel, right? I did not meet my bride because I had this perfect funnel and I did Facebook ads and paid marketing and the perfect person came out. No, the perfect person came from an introduction through conversations. And I think that's one of those things that is so important today in building a business, right? And there's a difference between chasing a transaction and getting that sale and having a business, right? Because chasing a transaction is not the same thing as building a business. Building a business is that long-term customers, the referrals, your reputation you get out there. And I think that only comes from human interactions, right? As AI is taking off here, now we so often look and say, did they write that or was that Chat GPT? Whereas if you hear us, right? If you hear a conversation, that's really Tom, right? He drops every G on ing, but that's how he talks.
Yeah. So yeah, this is clearly not an AI generated conversation that we're having here, right? So are there any like if you and I were on a long plane ride, and I said, tell me 3 secrets about podcasting that most people don't know. And maybe it may not be 3, but what are the what are the myths or the misconceptions that people have that we could dispel here?
Yeah. And I think the first one is more is better and bigger is better, right? So some people are just like, I just need to get on more and more shows, right? Or I need to get on bigger and bigger shows. No, more is not better. Bigger is not better. Better is better, right? So from that standpoint, find the shows that your ideal customers are listening to. Have a better conversation there, right? And it's more quality than just quantity. So I think that's one myth. The second myth out there is when people tell you, oh, you've got to have a podcast, right? My hat goes off to you, Stan, right? Having a podcast, you know how much work it is, right? The dirty little secret is that 80% of podcasts die within the first 10 episodes. It's a lot of work. It's almost like when people want to play for the NFL, right? I want to be paid millions of dollars to play for 2 hours on Sunday. They don't see all the work that goes into it. And so I always ask people, it's like, do you really want to do all that work? And there's a reason for it, right? It's a great way to nurture your current customers and nurture your current clients. But an easier way to do it, or even get started to see if you like doing it, is to be a guest, right? Leverage other people's audiences, right? That's the easy way to get started. So that's number 2. The third thing, and I think a lot of people have a problem with this, is they'll say, I'm not an expert, right? What would I talk about? And a friend of mine that's an attorney, he helped me with this. And I hope I get this right in front of you. He said the legal definition of an expert is someone that knows more by their training, their education, or their experience than the normal person, right? Is that about right?
Yeah, I've always thought an expert is some guy with a briefcase from 50 miles away. But yeah,
That's right. That's somebody with an accent's got to be an expert. So
right.
if you're not going on a podcast saying, I am the undisputed world-renowned expert, right? I don't know if those even exist, right? But I have expertise, right? If you've been doing your job for, for years, right? If you're running your business, you're working harder in that than anyone else. You have expertise. You've got a viewpoint. And I think that's something that, you can share with the world, right? If you've raised kids, you've got expertise in parenting, right? and there's someone that you could help on there. And so really it's one of those things where I think a lot of people will say, well, I'm an expert. I don't like the sound of my voice. Well, you don't have to listen to your voice, and you may not consider yourself an expert, but there's a lot of people you could help that do consider you an expert.
So I know you mentioned this earlier, but I just want to recap this again. What is the profile of the typical client that you're able to add the most value to?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So first one, it's based on a relationship sale. It's not a transaction, it's a relationship. They're dealing with a client that is more national than just geographical, right? So if everybody has to drive to your office, using national podcasts is going to be tough. But today, post-COVID, I think, more and more people are doing things virtually. So those are the two biggest things. And then we focus just in 3 verticals, right? There's a lot of podcasts out there, but we're focusing in just the verticals of business, right? Which is by far our biggest one. Health, nutrition, and wellness, and then faith and spirituality. And there's some crossover in all of those, but those are the people that we're really helping and we're getting the best results from. Also the people that just, they know they can help so many people and they feel like they're the best kept secret, right? Obscurity is their biggest problem, and it doesn't need to be.
Well, Tom, you're an inspiration. You've gotten me, you renewed my enthusiasm for podcasting, actually. So this is terrific. Any questions I didn't ask you that you'd like to, anything you'd like to say that I didn't prompt in my questions, I guess is what I'm asking.
I guess just one of the things that came up as we were talking here is that, we're all blessed to be a blessing, right? The lessons that we have learned through our life, through our education, from working with great clients, great mentors and stuff like that, they're not just for us, they're for other people. And I would just encourage you, share what you know. And that could be as a podcast host. It could be a podcast guest, could be as a mentor. It could be writing blogs if that's what you do. But I would just encourage people to do that. And if podcast guesting sounds like something that you might want to do, feel free to reach out to me. You don't have to figure out which Tom Schwab in Kalamazoo, Michigan I am. If you just go back to interviewvalet.com/legacy, I'll put all of my contact information, my calendar, and a free copy of the books.
Including a free copy of the book, right? So as you said, so yep. So I didn't count on that, but I'm going to go there and get a free copy of your book myself, and I'm going to send you a copy of my book as well. So that's interviewvalet.com/legacy. Legacy. Got it. So we're going to put that in the show notes, and I would encourage anybody listening who thinks podcasting could be something that would add value to your business, your professional practice, reach out to Tom. And so let me say, Tom, I really appreciate the time today. It's been a pleasure connecting with you. And hopefully we'll meet up somewhere and we can continue this conversation. So thank you. So this has been the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Stan Miller. Our guest today has been Tom Schwab. And I'm grateful and I appreciate very much the time today, Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.